Welcome to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen students of color to prepare for grad school. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Fu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into and successfully navigate grad school. For over 10 years, I've been helping first-gen students of color get into top grad programs in their field, and I'm really excited to support you on your academic journey too. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette, and today's episode is on how to survive college and grad school as a highly sensitive student. This year, I have made the decision to talk a little bit more about topics related to neurodivergence and neurodiversity. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper on managing specific challenges and embracing specific strengths. And I decided to do this and was validated by it, both in meetings and conversations that I've had in social media spaces, because I've been doing this work with my virtual assistant Samhar of downloading all of my old episodes, all 170 of them, and getting them transcribed with the software that I use. We use Otter AI. And then from there, my VA assists me by editing the transcripts to make sure that they make sense and that they are readable, that you can go to the website, download them, and access them. It's another way to make the work that I do more accessible. And so in having this conversation with Samhar about the episodes, the topics, the work that I do, sometimes it can be hard for you to think outside of yourself, to describe who you are and what you do from the perspective of someone who is new to meeting you and your work. And so Samhar mentioned something about how a lot of what I talk about is what I say, which is, last year, I started to be more specific about saying that I'm focusing on demystifying the grad school journey and teaching sustainable productivity tips and practices, and also focusing on personal development. So not just professional development, but the personal development aspect of getting to know ourselves better to live more values-oriented lives or more aligned lives, however you want to call that. But yeah, Samhar mentioned, but also, you are chronically ill, you are neurodivergent, and what you share is informed by that lens. And I thought to myself, you know what, that's true. And that's right. And those are the voices that I want to keep uplifting too. Because I know that my platform is all about supporting first-gen BIPOC students, first-gen students of color. But then that added element is that my perspective is from someone who is chronically ill and neurodivergent and has learned more about it recently in the last couple of years. And another thing that has come up is that because I've started to talk about neurodivergence a little bit more, I've had more people who trust me ask me, well, Doctora Yvette, what is neurodivergence? What is neurodiversity? Or maybe they're like, maybe I'm neurodivergent. I've always struggled with X, Y, and Z. Or, oh, my child's teacher is telling me that maybe I should get them assessed for X, Y, and Z. And of course, I always say, I say to others, like I'm telling you now, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not trained to diagnose anyone, but I can certainly speak from my positionality and from my experience as someone who is neurodivergent and someone who has a partner and son who are also neurodivergent, but very different from me. And And so I do know a thing or two about it. So I'll start today's episode just with a little bit of the 101 stuff. I want to define these terms for clarity, okay? So when I say the word neurodivergence, I'm referring to a term that's often used to describe the ways that certain people's brains have developed or work differently than your typical person's brain. This doesn't make them any better or worse. It just means they have different strengths and different struggles. Neurodiversity is a term that acknowledges the fact that we live in a world where so many people around us are different. And we all experience and feel and interact with the world in different ways, whether we are neurodivergent or neurotypical. So then comes the word neurotypical. That term is used to describe individuals whose behavior and brain function in ways that are considered to be the norm or quote unquote typical by a larger or more general population. So then the neurodivergent individual is someone who experiences neurodivergence. So that's where you get the neurodivergence, neurodiversity. And so I hear when folks say, I am neurodiverse. I think that a lot of people, what they're trying to say is that they are neurodivergent. Because neurodiversity refers to everyone and how we all experience the world differently. But if you have been diagnosed or have a strong suspicion and can self-identify in a way where you're pretty sure, but you just don't have access to the resources to get a diagnosis, then there's a good chance that you are neurodivergent. So in my case, for instance, I have struggled for most of my life. I've said this time and time again with depression and anxiety. It's an ongoing thing, on and off. And also more recently in the last couple of years, realized that I'm a highly sensitive person. I don't understand why it took me so long to realize that or to figure out that there is a term for this thing. I mean, I've always been called sensitive and sometimes didn't like being called sensitive growing up. But yes, there is an actual thing called, a highly sensitive person. And so in the world of neurodivergence, there are many different types. And you may or may not be familiar with all of them. I probably am not familiar with all of them. Again, this is not an expertise that I've kind of researched as a scholar of neurodivergence, but I am familiar that some of the ones that a lot of us hear about are ADHD, autism, dyslexia. There's also other forms of neurodivergence. There's dyscalculia, epilepsy, obsessive compulsive disorder, highly sensitive person. This includes also folks who struggle with chronic mental health disorders like depression and anxiety, and also individuals who have learning disabilities. There's a lot more of things that fall under the neurodivergence umbrella, and we all experience that same thing differently too. So you might know more than one autistic person and they're so different. Like my husband and son, they're so different. You might know someone who has ADHD and then someone else who is ADHD. Again, they might be so different. We all experience it differently, although there are some common markers. And so in my case, HSP, or being highly sensitive, is one of them. And I have struggled with that for most of my life without knowing what it was. I always thought that it was just a byproduct of struggling with depression and anxiety, but it's more than that. People who are highly sensitive happen to have deeper cognitive processing to emotional, social, and physical stimuli. It's similar to having a sensory processing disorder in that you have a sensitivity to sensory stimuli. So how do you know if you're highly sensitive? There's a good chance that you might be highly compassionate. You might experience emotions intensely. You might think, analyze, and worry more than others. You might be easily aroused, easily stimulated, easily overwhelmed. You might be sensitive to external stimuli. You might need more downtime than others. There also are folks who, if they're highly sensitive, they're probably also highly intuitive, highly observant, very thoughtful, like I mentioned earlier, very compassionate, highly creative, have a rich inner life, and can connect deeply with others. There's a lot more. There are actually multiple quizzes you can find online to determine whether or not you're highly sensitive. And also, I'll have to link a book that I read about neurodivergence, and I'm blanking out on the name of the book, so I'll add it in the show notes if you see a link to a book. That book has a really, really good list of characteristics of HSP, but it focuses on neurodivergence in general. So if you want to learn more about that topic, I would recommend that book. So growing up, I didn't know that was a thing. I think a lot of us, older millennials, sadly, unfortunately, especially women and people of color, we were not diagnosed. Maybe we didn't have access to it. Maybe they didn't maybe professionals didn't notice these traits in us because they were conflated with maybe some cultural expectation and things like that. And so a lot of us, because there wasn't a strong conversation about neurodivergence back then, we got lost. They told us girls that we're just anxious. But we didn't get these official diagnoses, and a lot of us still don't have it. But in my case, highly sensitive, and some of the negative things that I would hear other people say about me, and you might relate to this if you suddenly realize you're highly sensitive too, is now I was this brown girl, always out in the sun, brown, shy girl who grew up in a strict household with immigrant parents, with an abusive father, with older brothers who weren't always supportive, who didn't embrace all parts of my identity. And so I would always hear, whether it was my brothers or my dad or people around me telling me, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, you're too dramatic, you're too much, just relax, just calm down, toughen up. I still get a little triggered when I just hearing myself say those things out loud, because then you start to internalize these things and associate them with you. And so it takes a lot of unlearning to embrace who you are and embrace the amazing things that come with being highly sensitive or any other neurodivergence that you may identify with, that you may have. And so that, along with many other things and experiences in my childhood, resulted in me becoming a perfectionistic person, a people-pleasing person, a young adult who was obsessed with learning about other people's behavior and the how of doing things. I was always going to workshops to learn tips and tricks and strategies. And I would always be wondering, so and I thought it was just a first gen thing. But more recently, I realized it's not just a first gen experience. It's also a neurodivergence experience where you're overanalyzing other people's behavior and the way that they do things and trying to mimic them because you've been taught your whole life that this is what you do to be successful. And so, one of the examples of one of the things I struggled with a lot in college and in grad school was networking. And I'll be honest, I still struggle with networking. Not as much as before, but it's still, takes some concerted effort on my behalf. But I would wonder, how do people network? How do they connect? What type of message do they send each other? How? How do they not be socially awkward? How do you talk to a stranger? And yeah, so again, I only recently realized, wow, this is a thing. Like my strong interest and desire in learning about other people's behavior and how they do things, the how, and then shedding light on that how on this podcast, for instance, that's part of how I've learned to navigate and survive in this world. And so knowing what I know now, if I could write a letter or record a podcast to my former self, if I could talk to my former self, these are some of the things that I wish I would have done, or I would have done more, or I would have done better to improve the way that my higher ed experience was as a highly sensitive student. Because I had a lot of struggles and I didn't 100% embrace all the awesome things about me. And again, I wish that I did. So here are the things I would say to myself. The first is in terms of advice. And this is, to anyone who may be struggling. The first thing, if you perceive that you might be neurodivergent, or you have been diagnosed and you know that you are, so if you haven't received an official diagnosis, I would recommend, taking advantage of your student health insurance. I'm someone who didn't have health insurance until I got to college. Didn't go to doctors until I got to college. So I understand the experience of not having financial and educational and health health resources, or what is it like? Healthcare resources. So if it's possible, if it's feasible, you're a student, you have student health insurance, look into talking to a professional, medical professional, and getting a diagnosis or getting some type of documentation. It may not necessarily have to be a diagnosis, but having these things, whatever your symptoms are, whatever your characteristics are, having them documented or having a diagnosis, that would have helped me, because then I could have learned about the different supports that I'd have access to through the Disability Services Office. I unfortunately struggled a lot with internalized ableism. I would shame myself for being so anxious, for feeling like the world was too much, for getting overwhelmed easily, for struggling to socialize, for going on for hours, days, sometimes weeks, masking, which is what masking is, where you try to behave the way that others behave, but then it leaves you feeling depleted at the end of it. When you unmask and your authentic, true self, it can be really tiring to be masking all day, or for days or for weeks on out. I mean, I know that to some extent I was able to socialize and have friends and all of that in college, but I did struggle, and I did often break down at the end of each quarter. It was like a sigh of relief, like, oh, I survived another quarter. And that's when it all kind of came flooding. All the emotions came flooding. So again, learn about seeking healthcare related support from some sort of medical professional, getting documentation, and validating that your experience is a thing, and that you deserve support, and that just because what your experience doesn't look like other types of disabilities, maybe because it's not a visible disability, maybe it's because you're not needing to use a mobility aid, you might feel bad, you might even gaslight yourself, like, no, I don't need help, or I'm not struggling that much, or maybe I shouldn't make things easier for me. Like maybe it's a form of cheating the system. I don't want to cheat the system. But no, if you're struggling this much, and if you have the confirmation of a medical professional, then yes, you are entitled to support. I want to say that again. Yes, you are entitled to support. You don't have to keep struggling or struggling to this extent forever. Okay. All right. The next thing I want to say, and this again, I know it comes from a place of privilege, but if it's possible, if it's feasible, if it's within your ability, if you have access to it, work with a therapist to receive ongoing support. As a student, you might have access to a certain number of therapy sessions through your counseling and psychological services center or office. And yeah, it might not be every week that you can see someone. Maybe it's every other week. Maybe it's every month. But actually nowadays there are more options for online therapy support and for relatively more affordable options. I say relatively because even for some of us, like the only affordable option is free, and that's just really hard to find. But if it's within your means, if you have access to it, take advantage and get that support. I can't tell you just how helpful it is to have someone else who can help you navigate difficult transitions, especially if you struggle with transitions and change. And a lot of us who are highly sensitive, we really, really struggle with change. I had a therapist who helped me navigate my transition with quitting my higher ed job and moving abroad. I have a therapist now who's been helping me with, navigating life as an immigrant in a new country and now deciding I want to move back to the US. And so my therapist is going to be helping me with navigating that other transition because I'm not moving back home. So lots of change. But now I know that I can handle it, even though I'm highly sensitive. Why? Because I have support and resources and tools. I can't afford to see her often, but even if it's once a month, it still helps. Okay. The next thing I want to say to all highly sensitive students out there is to find your safe and calm spaces. This is one thing I did do without even realizing it. I was always on a mission to find spots on the UCLA campus that were quiet, that were calm, and that they were hidden. So I remember many, many years ago finding, it's probably not even a hidden gem anymore, but I found this gem spot on the 4th or 5th floor of the arts library. Hardly anybody would be there. And there were all these tables and outlets and there was windows and a view, and it was perfect. And it got me through a lot of dissertating, a lot of writing of my dissertation. But yeah, the safe and calm spaces include your home. Maybe you live with roommates. Ensuring that your roommates are people that help to make you feel safe and calm, that they're not having parties all the time, because that's probably not going to be great for your nervous system. It may mean having conversations with roommates about expectations and needs. And in some cases, it might also mean moving out, finding new roommates, or if it's within your means, living on your own. So safe and calm spaces are important because, again, we need more calm and more downtime than a lot of other people. This I say to everybody. This next thing I'm going to say, it applies to everyone, but it especially applies to you if you're highly sensitive, and it's seeking out supportive mentors. Please try not to get discouraged if you run into unsupportive faculty, lackluster faculty, busy faculty, toxic faculty. It's not always easy to find the supportive ones. And it takes a lot of effort for you to reach out and meet with them and all that. The list goes on and on about like developing a relationship, but please, please, please don't give up. Find supportive mentors. You don't need to disclose anything to them if you're not comfortable. But keep pushing yourself to the extent that is safe to you so that you can expand your support system to include professors and mentors who are not going to hurt your well-being. Sometimes it's inevitable and you've got a faculty member or someone whose course you're taking or an advisor or someone who's just really difficult to work with. And if there's no way, shape, or form for you to change that, then surround yourself with other people who can help you with navigating that, or who can provide you with the support you're not receiving from that professor, from that advisor. So definitely seek out supportive mentors, because they will make a big difference in your experience. The other thing I want to say that I wish I would have told myself, I wish someone would have told me if I knew better, and that's to embrace yourself, embrace your talents, embrace your skills, embrace the things that make you you. Maybe you're really good at one-on-one encounters rather than group encounters. So then embrace that. Go to office hours and do your participating there. Talk to a professor or a TA one-on-one. If you prefer a smaller circle of friends, then don't force yourself to go to big parties. Maybe try planning smaller get-togethers. Maybe go to like events in more calmer or intimate environments. Maybe you're really creative, then find an outlet to express that creativity. And it's okay to do that, even if it's unrelated to what you're studying. It'll actually help you because it'll give you a reward, and that can be your reward that can motivate you to get your other work done. So embrace your talents. Along that line, similarly, do things that fill your cup. This could be considered self-care to some, but I mean, in your case, if you're highly sensitive, do things that help to calm you down. This can mean meditation, journaling, yoga, taking a hot shower or bath, deep breathing exercises, stretches, alone time, spending time with an emotional support animal, walking outdoors, going out into nature, you name it. Figure out what are the things that fill your cup, that help to calm you down, and do more of those things and integrate them into your daily or weekly routine. The next thing is really important, really, really, really important. That is to consider your speed. What I mean by that is that as someone who is highly sensitive, I know that I don't work at the same speed as others. I'm highly sensitive and I'm chronically ill. I definitely don't work at the same speed as others. So you might not be able to go at the same pace as your peers. You might not be able to take as many courses, take on as many projects, or even finish your program in the same number of years as your peers. Maybe you might need to take a break. Maybe you might need to take an extra year. And so for that, I do think it's important to right now, if you're a student now, go and look up your university or department's leave policies. Find out about their extended time policies. Don't wait until you have an emergency to look into this and see if this is even feasible for you. Because what if having one more year could make all the difference between you struggling or making yourself sick or debating leaving your program to you finishing your program and finishing well, or finishing with more clarity or more confidence. It's not the worst thing in the world if you take longer. It's not the worst thing in the world if you take a leave, especially if it allows you to do things in your own way, on your own terms. So consider your speed. I know it's hard to not fall into that tendency of the comparison trap, comparing yourself to your peers, the folks on your cohort, to see everybody graduating before you or making, more progress than you, but they are not you. They don't have your timeline. And it doesn't make them any better or worse than you. We just all work differently. So the sooner you learn to embrace that, the sooner you'll be able to more confidently advocate for yourself so that you can meet your own intrinsic goals and you can be successful according to, again, your own definition of success. So consider your speed. That's super duper important. The last thing I want to share, and I've said this again, this applies to everyone, but it's especially important for neurodivergent and highly sensitive students. And that is to learn to set boundaries and to learn to advocate for yourself as soon as possible. I didn't learn how to say no. I didn't learn how to set boundaries. I had no boundaries in grad school. So I didn't learn all of this until after grad school. And what can help you if you struggle with this too, like I did, is to start keeping track of moments that trigger your nervous system. Maybe you pull out your little notes app, or you have a little notebook that you carry with you everywhere, or you just find a place where you can jot down your thoughts of moments that have triggered your nervous system to go on overdrive. So just start to track them. And then later, when you're not on overdrive, when you're not feeling that intensity, when you feel a little more calm, go back to those notes and think to yourself, well, is there something that I can do about it? Is there something that I could do differently next time? Maybe you struggle with receiving written feedback. And maybe next time you can ask your professor if they can provide verbal feedback. Maybe they record their feedback on Zoom or using some sort of like audio recorder. Or maybe they give you verbal feedback with you in person when they meet with you. Or maybe you struggle with attending and presenting conferences. It's really overwhelming. It's a lot of people. And maybe you could see if they can move your panel time to an early morning time on the first day, or a late afternoon, or the last session on the last day. I say this because they're usually the times that the least amount of people show up to panels. And I want to remind you that it's okay to have a small audience if you're presenting at a conference. If you can't do that, you could also always keep practicing with a trusted friend, or you could try to scope out the location beforehand so that you can familiarize yourself with it so that it feels less overwhelming and you can minimize your anxiety too. If you are being pressured to do something that you really don't want to do, it's okay to say no. Again, that's part of learning to advocate for yourself, is learning when to say no and what saying no means to you. So for you, saying no to this might mean that you're saying yes to yourself and to your own sense of peace and calm, if you're saying no to something that you absolutely don't have to do. And if it is something you absolutely have to do and it is really, really hard on you, that's where the accommodations are helpful. So if you struggle with saying no in general, I'm going to ask you to check out episode 174 of my podcast, because in that episode, I offer email scripts that you can use to say no in different situations. I mean, if someone's asking you something right there in person and you struggle to say no, just tell them, like, can you give me some time to think about it? Or can you email me about it so that I can, review it and think about it? Giving yourself time will give you the time and space to come up with a way that feels safe to you to say no. Okay. So learning to set boundaries and advocating for yourself, very, very important for everyone. But again, especially highly sensitive students and neurodivergent students. Hopefully you enjoyed today's session. I will probably do a couple more this year on neurodivergence. And I'm hoping I can find some speakers who can speak to their experiences and their knowledge on different topics. Hopefully I can bring someone who can talk about ADHD, because I have, clients who have or are ADHD, and that's one thing that they're trying to learn how to navigate a little bit better. And other types of neurodivergence, and also disabilities too. So be on the lookout. It's something that I'm going to try to bring up as a topic a little bit more. Even if you are not neurodivergent, I think this is important to learn about, because there is someone out there that you've encountered that is part of your life who is. So the more we learn to support each other, the better off we are. And actually, when I talk about accessibility and accommodations and accessibility tools with other people, you might be surprised to find out that a lot of these tools are not just great for disabled and neurodivergent folks, but they're also great for you too. So the more you learn about support others, who knows, you might find ways to support yourself too. Okay. All right. I'll talk to you all next time. You probably thought this episode was over, but I actually have a quick postscript because I was re-listening to the episode, getting ready to put it out there. And I thought, I really, really need to clarify these two things for my audience before I can move forward with publishing this. So the first one is I want to clarify the use of the terms neurodiversity and neurodivergence or neurodivergent. Those terms actually were coined by different people. Neurodiversity was coined by a sociologist, Judy Singer, in 1997. And neurodivergent and neurodivergence was coined by autistic activist Cassian Asasumasu in year 2000. I'm not 100% set on the year 2000 because I couldn't find the exact source, but I believe it's close to around that year when it was coined. Why do I say this? Because these terms are relatively new terms. They came out in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the other thing I want to say is that they are not clinical terms. So you can self-identify. They are self-identifying terms. And because of that, there's a lot of debates right now in the neurodivergent community about what does and doesn't count within the umbrella of neurodivergence. Some folks include mental illness. Some folks don't. Some folks include trauma and things like post-traumatic stress disorder. Other people don't. So again, it's up to you to do a little bit more research, learn a little bit more about this topic. And if you feel that you can relate, if you feel seen, heard, felt, validated by this community, then of course you get to self-identify as neurodivergent too. That's it for today's episode. No more postscripts after this. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review of the podcast. If you leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, you become eligible for a free half-hour coaching session with me. Yes, that's right, 1 free session. Once you leave a review, you can email me a screenshot and I'll send you a link to sign up. The second way to show your love is to get yourself a copy of my free 15-page Grad School Femtoring Kit, which includes resources on research, organization, grad school, and career prep. Go to gradschoolfemtoring.com/kit to get it today. The third and last way to support my show is to follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally TikTok with the handle @Grad School Femtoring. Thanks again, and until next time.